Wonderful, thank you. Oh, by the way, mine's Megatron, by the way, going back to the previous debate. So, look, thank you very much for the opportunity actually to come here and present to you guys. I think, Laundrapp's quite an extraordinary story, and I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes, maybe slightly more, telling you a little bit about that story, just because it gives a little bit of background in terms of the rest of the content of the presentation. These things are quite difficult to do because there are different people looking for different things, trying to take different things away from a conference like this. This is my 3rd conference in the last 5 days, so I apologise if I'm slightly bleary-eyed. But I'm here all day and happy to take questions if you want to catch up with me later. So if my clicker actually decided to work, if I picked up the right clicker, there you go. So yeah, I'm Ed Relf, I'm the CEO of Laundrapp. We have lots of great press photographs like this, you'll see all the way through the deck, and lots of quotes as well. So I wish to thank Seth Godin and the likes, Jeff Bezos actually, who provided some quotes for this deck as well, which you'll see coming up very shortly. And today, I'm here to present to you basically this, which is how to achieve app growth in this very, very highly competitive market. And there are really 3 things I really want to touch on. Firstly, bridging this gap between product development and marketing. Really pleased to hear some of the key kind of topics already being raised today, which I'll touch on in a little bit more detail in this presentation. And this idea of building a data-driven design methodology around creating your apps, which I think is incredibly important. And we've already touched on very briefly on soft launches, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail because I think that's very, very important. And hopefully a few insights along the way as well. So I've been responsible for a few fairly successful businesses. Laundrapp is a great story. I've worked in marketing for about 18 years or so now, but I've moved kind of more into entrepreneurialism, and I'm also an investor as well. I've been fortunate enough to win some awards, and Laundrapp is in a really interesting space, the on-demand space, right? And I know some on-demand companies here today. And this is really quite an extraordinary space. We've already touched on Uber. But there's really quite a lot of excitement around on-demand and making on-demand work. But I guess the really important thing to remember in the whole kind of on-demand and shared economy is that actually there are still relatively few companies that are actually that successful. It's actually a very, very tough industry to get right. So we basically come up with this idea, and it was to create the Uber of laundry. And I know it's very cliche. I mentor with some startups, and you always hear, oh, it's the Groupon of this, or it's the Uber of that. But genuinely, 2 years ago, not many people were saying that. So, we kind of started with this defining vision, which was the Uber of laundry. I pulled together a couple of guys on the operations side and tech side, and we did another great photo shoot. And then we created this thing, right, which is essentially turning the mobile phone, the smartphone, into a remote control for people's laundry. So we developed this platform, basically, which is the app, a logistics platform that sits on the back end that does lots of clever real-time logistics, an algorithm tracking fleets across the country, etc. And we create a driver app, which is just like Uber, that all of our drivers use. If you haven't used us, basically it's an app that allows you to outsource your laundry and dry cleaning. We're live across London. We do free collection and delivery from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. We also do e-commerce. We're very interested in this concept of owning the last mile to the customer doorstep. It's something that's very, very interesting for us. And we've created a great piece of technology that allows us to do Uber-style tracking, which allows you to track your dirty laundry across London, if you so wish, and lots of other really clever stuff around logistics. But I think the key thing here, first quote, is success in a startup is being around tomorrow, lots of days in a row. We are a startup. It means we are scrappy. We are, for all intents and purposes, making things up as we go along. But that's the beauty of being in a startup. So we launched January 16th, 2015. I've raised $10 million now to date for the business, and we're live in 50 towns or cities across the UK, and that's all been achieved in just over a year. So we're live in London, Bristol, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Milton Keynes, Cardiff, etc. And if you live in London, you'll maybe see the odd van driving around as well. 750,000 items cleaned. We're certainly one of the fastest growing startups in the UK. and pioneering this convergence of digital technology and real-world services. So that's the ad for Laundrap over, and another photograph. And we've got an opportunity here to really disrupt an entire industry. This is an industry, the laundry and dry cleaning industry, as you can probably imagine. I actually just came from a conference in the Netherlands, actually, presenting Laundrap. And you can pretty much expect, I mean, this is relatively a cash-based, paper-based industry. So what we're doing is fairly radical stuff. So to come back to I guess, the point of the presentation around achieving app growth in this highly competitive market, it's bloody tough, right? It's bloody hard, and it's getting harder. And every single day, you know, I work with our marketing team, our fantastic marketing team, and we're trying new things out all the time. The platforms are constantly changing. Things always seem like they're not working or not being tracked properly. You don't often know even really what you should be tracking. And absolutely beware of anyone that tells you they've cracked it. I've nailed it. I know exactly how it works. You know, they're probably trying to sell you something, or they're probably fooling themselves, in my experience. And, you know, but that said, I think collectively, and with conferences and conversations and networking, you know, we can find some answers, because there are some things that will work. But, you know, if I came to this conference today expecting, you know, a silver bullet, likelihood is I won't have that. I certainly probably wouldn't even be here presenting, right, if I knew how this worked. But I think collectively we can pull some ideas and hopefully make something happen. So I wanted to talk to you first about this framework, right, of how to build sticky products. Now, this doesn't necessarily just need to be around developing a new product. It could also be a pre-existing product as well. So I'm a big fan of this, which is the build, measure, learn cycle. I'm sure everyone here has read the Lean Startup. This comes straight from that. And if you haven't, definitely read it. But this is an iterative product development methodology. And I basically overlayered a strategy on top of this, and I've done this at 3 or 4 of my previous startups. Now, I call it checkpointing. One day I'll think of a better word for it, but for now, we'll go with that. And this is kind of like the traditional model of how products are developed, right? It's an idea. Somebody will spec something out. You develop a wireframe out the product, and you start working on UI. And then that gets handed over to a development team, and they start to develop the product. And you go through all these kind of phases, and then you get to a launch. And then once it's launched, you spend lots of money on marketing, but that's definitely, obviously, not the way you want to approach it. And that's the old model. The new model is this. So exactly the same process as before, but we obviously soft launch. Now, I came also from a background in the games industry, and soft launch in the games industry is definitely choose a market such as Australia or New Zealand or Singapore, where you can basically test the product, understand key metrics, engagement, etc., before you then launch it in the US and other markets. Because the concept, of course, is that you don't want to burn those markets with a poor quality product. So I've introduced in my previous businesses this concept of checkpointing. So checkpointing, you essentially start with your main KPIs, and most KPIs will be around marketing spend, cost per install, retention, day 1, day 7, day 30 retention, conversion, cost per acquired customer, average transaction value, ARP, DAO, etc., etc. Depends on the business. You know, you'll be tracking other different types of key metrics. Key ones obviously are cost per acquisition and lifetime value, right? Because that's where the profit and the contribution margin or the gross margin is for your business. Cost per install actually for Laundrap is almost irrelevant, actually. I don't mind paying £15 for an acquired user, that if 100% of those people go on and place a purchase. So actually for us, CPI is not actually such a critical measure. And then essentially what you want to do at the very, very start of building the company is you want to overlay the KPIs with these checkpoints, right? And you focus product dev and marketing, and you sit them together, and you focus on these KPIs. Now, the key principle here is that you go from one checkpoint to the next, to the next, to the next. So if your first KPI is all around player onboarding or customer onboarding, therefore, you just focus on onboarding and the sign-up process, and you don't focus on anything else until you've actually got that metric working. So once you have these KPIs, those KPIs will split out into lots of different areas for the development team. So this is essentially how it will work, right? So week 1, you're soft launching your product. So in the case of Laundrapp, we soft launched around October, September-ish, 2014. And week 1 for us was very shaky, right? We had a minimum viable product, and if you're not embarrassed by the first version of what you've launched too late, right? And actually what we launched was pretty embarrassing stuff, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want to do, because it means that you've moved quick enough, you've scrambled the team to get product to market as quickly as possible. Then you want to build a dashboard, right? Now everyone here will have dashboards in lots of different ways, whether you do it in Excel or you track it through an attribution channel. Feel free to take photographs of this. It's not real data. No worries there. But basically, you end up with a dashboard. Now, dashboard for us, week 1, choose 2 or 3 marketing channels, and you start to track these metrics. Now, your KPIs or your checkpoints basically sit across the top. So this week, all we're doing is focusing on, day 1 retention, getting the customers from app install into basically opening the app the second day. And that's all you focus on for the first checkpoint. And it may be in that first checkpoint, you might spend the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months just on that. And that's absolutely fine. What you don't want to do as a team is you don't want to be focusing on every key metric all the time, because that's when things don't happen. So then what you learn is you start to learn that some of the marketing channels start to work as well. So while the development team are working on just focusing on new customer onboarding, the marketing team are also now starting to test channels. And you start to understand some things that work and some things that don't. And the key thing with a soft launch, of course, is that you want to acquire users in this very controlled environment. You want to acquire just enough to be representable of your audience. And you want to obviously focus development on these weekly KPIs. So, lots of people talk about Scrum and Agile methodology and things like that. We have a service review process once a week. We sit down with the dev team and we focus on the KPIs. And that's kind of how we've approached this. I was recently asked to consult with a company that basically was very proud that they had acquired like 3 or 4 million organic downloads. But actually then realized that their retention, their day 7 to day 30 retention was terrible. Guys, it's too late. You don't want 2 or 3 million downloads and then realize that the retention's not working, right? You learn that when you have 1,000 downloads, right? And then you open up the doors. So you do not move on to the next checkpoint until the previous one is achieved. So that's really important. And then there was a question earlier, which is nicely teed up for this, which was how long do you typically stay in soft launch for, right? Is it 4 weeks? Is it 2 months? Is it 6 months? Is it never, right? I've worked in businesses where products have actually never come to market because they didn't hit the soft launch metrics. And that's the business we kind of work in today. Now, that's easier said than done when you work for a large business and you have multiple products. It's obviously not good when you're working in a business like Laundrapp where you have 1 product. So for us, the answer about how long should you stay in soft launch for, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle of that. Now for Laundrapp, the answer is actually about 3 months. So it took us about 3 months going through the checkpoints, basically focusing the dev team and the marketing team, on that funnel. And they wouldn't move on to the next part of the funnel until we had actually hit the metric for the previous part. And if things are working, your cost per acquisition should be doing this, right? So as the dev team are focused on the metrics and refining the funnel, your cost per acquisition is steadily declining. And that's the kind of trend you want to be looking for in soft launch. And then we're on to week 2, and we're scaling, right? So week 2, we introduced new channels, right? And we've got some more learnings now from a marketing standpoint. Maybe we're testing creative, testing new channels, etc. And now we're starting to build up insight around lifetime value. Now, very early on, it's very difficult, right, to track lifetime value. Basically, it relies on a lot of equations and a lot of spreadsheets. But over time, of course, when your business is 1, 2, 3 years old, it's an awful lot easier to have a handle on lifetime value. But you do what you can when you're building a product. And basically, you're looking for this trend, right, which is the cost per acquisition intersecting the lifetime value at some point. And when it does, that's when you launch. And that's, in my experience, what a lot of people get wrong. So fast forward, we've got a great product, it's highly refined, and now we've got some really, really good marketing, and we're finally ready to launch. So as I said with Laundrapp, that process took us about 2 or 3 months to do. We weren't sure how long it was going to take us, and believe me, when you're a brand new startup and you've just onboarded your very early stage investors, it actually means you've got to really hold your nerve. Particularly when you have people that are investing in your business that maybe don't really get the concept of soft launching. All they want is a deadline. So it does require, like I say, a little bit of holding your nerve. So that's great. You've got a really refined product. You know that you're hitting the key metrics. Now it's time to scale. So the obvious question is how to acquire these customers in as cost-effective way as possible. It's an incredibly good question, and if anyone has any answers, please let me know, because, we're still trying to work it out a little bit as well. And it will be different for every business. I've been in this space for a very long time, and honestly, not one company has really been the same. So, very quickly, what I can tell you from an investor standpoint, because I have a very large network on the angel and the VC side of things, is they're looking from a marketing standpoint at this CAC to LTV ratio. So if you only take one thing away from this conversation, if you all want to go set up your own businesses one day, which I'm sure you probably all do want to do that, your investors will be asking this question: what's CAC to LTV ratio? And that basically means your cost per acquisition is obviously lower than your lifetime value, and 3 is the magic number. So these guys are looking for the fact that your cost per acquisition is a third of your lifetime value, and they call that CAC to LTV payback, right? So not only is it the number, it's how quickly can you get the payback. Because if you can demonstrate that your CAC to LTV ratio is more than 3, I think Dropbox is actually about 15 or 16 from a presentation I heard quite recently. If you can get that CAC to LTV ratio around 3, and very, very quickly, within the space of maybe a year or so, then at that moment, every VC pretty much in the world is going to start writing checks. So that's really where you kind of want to get to. So coming again back to this question of how do we now get these users, right? Well, it's bewildering. There's so many platforms, there's so many different advertising networks, ways of tracking things, analytics providers. Every day my inbox is flooded with agencies talking about new ways of tracking attribution or advertising networks. And your mind kind of gets blown. And at Laundrapp, we've tested hundreds and hundreds of different channels. And on top of all of that, some things that you think are working don't actually then work the next day. So, for example, Instagram user acquisition is a really good example of that. Facebook add it into the Facebook platform, and it's fantastic. Everyone's driving CPIs at £1 or £2, and 2 weeks later, it's back to the kind of numbers that you expect to see from Facebook. So it's really just a question of testing and moving as quickly as possible, which doesn't really quite answer the question, but hopefully you get the point. This is kind of obvious stuff, right? You start by adding in analytics, whether it's GA or Localytics or any of the other kind of providers, and now you've got your marketing channels. Attribution that sits in the middle is the one common thing that I continually hear that people have problems with. We use an attribution platform. Attribution platform tracks all of the key events through the customer funnel in the product. That basically allows us to overlay marketing with lifetime value, and that's basically then like a real-time return on investment dashboard, and that's been critical to us in terms of unlocking how we track marketing. So what do we do from an advertising standpoint? Well, the answer is a lot, and we've tried outdoor advertising, we've tried TV, digital advertising, as you'd expect, street teams, mail drops came up earlier, push and SMS, blogger outreach, affiliate, etc., etc. I'm pretty sure there's barely a channel we haven't touched. And from a digital standpoint, there are so many platforms and channels and challenges. The honest truth is we continue to test as much as we can. But there are some common threads, which I'm happy to share because it's, well, not particularly confidential because, well, hopefully you've seen some of the advertising. And I think there's some common themes coming out of these conversations already today. And I know we're talking a little bit about this, which is TV, a little bit later as well. TV is a really interesting channel for us. It's actually a common, probably one of the most common threads over the last 10 years in terms of my experience at least. The trick with TV, obviously, is how you track it. Now, many people will take a very organic approach to tracking TV, and that approach typically will be taking the control of a period of time where you haven't run TV advertising, and you look at the organic uplift. And then you keep your fingers crossed that Apple don't then feature you at the same time, or your marketing team don't send out an email campaign, because you're looking for a really nice uplift that you can really associate to TV. That's kind of like the old methodology, and that's definitely not what we do. We've actually got a piece of technology that we've built straight into the app that allow us to correlate actual impacts to TV impacts to actual impressions in the product. So it allows us to track network and time of the day back to return on investment. So that's been incredibly useful for us. So that's effectively almost like an AdWords type platform to allow us to buy TV. Now, TV is definitely not a silver bullet. So I'm not standing here professing that do this and everything will change. It won't. But actually, when we've done this, the halo effect has been good enough to the other channels that it probably does make sense. We do outdoor advertising, which, kind of moderately works for us. Outdoor London Underground advertising, etc. And then there's some neat things that we do as well, right? And again, none of this particularly confidential, because hopefully if there are any customers here, you may have actually received some of this stuff. So Uber were great pioneers with the digital kind of friend, get friend, incentivize friend, get friend process that they have built directly into the app. We do it. I'm sure most of you guys do it as well. We actually took it a step further, and we actually do it in a physical form. So when you become a customer of Laundrapp, which I'm hoping you all will do today, basically a week or so afterwards, you'll actually receive this pack in the post. And it's basically Uber's friend get friend incentivized thing, but via a credit card. So you'll get this pack through the post, and it's really nice. It's tangible, it's real, you can touch it, you can kind of give it to your friends and family, and it kind of really works quite well for us. But the big learning for me, coming from this like purely digital world, is the fact that we can spend as much money as we want. We can have all of this great activity, building TV campaigns and radio and outdoor and tracking it via attribution, and it's all fantastic. The reality is our business, my business, is a make or break on this person delivering your laundry or dry cleaning at your doorstep. So it's kind of quite a big learning for us in a lot of ways, or certainly for myself. But this person here is our shop window for our business. So actually, this person here, building a rapport with the customer, being able to show the customer how things work in the app, answering questions, is incredibly important. Laundry and dry cleaning, which is an industry I knew nothing about, just a couple of years ago. It's a very, very personal service. I'm bestowing my favorite jacket to you, and I trust you with it. Therefore, I want to be able to see somebody and interact with that person, which is why, we hire, and this isn't a secret, we employ all of our drivers, because it's incredibly important that they're trained. That's a very, very important part of our business. So essentially, just to kind of wrap all of that stuff up, really, I mean, multi-channel acquisition for us is absolutely critical, right? We don't have, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody in this room, one thing that just unlocks everything. There's a huge lever, we pull it, and all the customers just come flooding in. I wish that was the case. The reality is there are lots of small levers that we continually pull, and we drip feed users into the product. But it's being smart with those users that come into the product, which is really key. So for us, this idea of this kind of customer communication, almost like a system, right? So customers come into a product, and that first 30 days experience is absolutely critical. Because when you find Uber or any other new services, be it Y-Plan or whatever, that first 30 days, this is life-changing for you. This changes everything. And you almost have almost a euphoria. It's a fantastic product that I've just found, and I want to tell people about it. That's the time when you need to leverage it. So for us, it's almost that theatre of that first 30 days is critically important, because 90% of what we do just won't work. But fortunately, 10% of what we do does, and does very, very well, which makes up for the 90%. And, you know, above the line for us is actually very, very important. And it's easier said than done because tracking above the line, be it outdoor or TV or radio, is actually very, very difficult to do. The obvious way of doing it is via voucher code, which we do as well, but not everybody will obviously use a voucher code that they hear on a radio station. So it's not an exact science. It's getting better. However, you know, for us, and I think it's probably largely the industry that we're in, laundry and dry cleaning, and particularly the concept of laundrap, it's actually, there's a huge educational piece that's needed for a company like ours. And cross-platform for us has been very important as well. I've been pleasantly surprised already today to hear the conversations around web, actually, because lots of the tools of my trade were actually learned in web, and it really does feel to me, and particularly with laundrap as well, that web is really coming back into play. And predominantly that's because of the cost per acquisition. And also I think largely, you know, the industry that we're in is probably still relatively dominated by actually a phone call or somebody physically walking into a shop. And if not that, then certainly web. So web for us has been a very good channel to push people into mobile, which I think correlates quite well with the earlier conversations around Y-Plan. But I think the key thing that we really focus on, right, is this thing of a good decision made quicker is far better than a great one made slower. We really focus on very, very rapid execution. As a team, we move very quickly. And sometimes, often to our detriment, maybe too quickly, but that's incredibly important. This is a fast-moving industry. But the biggest challenge for us is definitely around this idea of changing consumer habit and behavior, which has meant all of those traditional channels, you know, be it PPC or mobile advertising networks, just really haven't yet come into play. So hopefully there's some interesting bits there. You've learned hopefully a little bit about the business, some of our challenges, hopefully about the development methodology that we went through, and I've kind of done with some other businesses as well. I'm around the whole day. Blatant ad. I was told I was allowed to do it. I'm around all day. If you want to actually try laundrap, there's a code that's live only for by the end of play today, midnight tonight. If you want to try it out, the code is acquire. Thank you very much. Thank you.